In the first 6 chapters of the book called The Story, we moved very quickly through the first 5 books of the Bible. Till last week we covered Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. You remember in that story, and now we move into the story of when the people moved into the land of promise after the Exodus event. And if you're following along in your real Bibles, and not treating the storybook as the Bible, which it's not, but if you're following along in your Bible, you will now know that we are in the Old Testament book of Joshua. So just sort of to recap, remember the people of Israel were in Egypt, left in the land of Goshen to cross the Red Sea, and in the Exodus event went into the Sinai Peninsula, where within the first year they met God at Mount Sinai and received the 10 Commandments. And let's go back, let's remember, the people of Israel were in Egypt for a long time, because prior in their history, the land of Israel and the whole land went into a famine. Remember, the Old Testament character of Joseph had been sold by his older brothers into slavery and found himself in Pharaoh's favor. And during good times, stored up the food in Egypt. And all the people of Israel had to go to Egypt because that's the only place there was food. And they were there for several hundreds of years. And then Pharaoh began to enslave them and torture them. Crying out, God heard them, released them through Moses' leadership across the Red Sea into the Sinai Peninsula, where they meet God and get the 10 Commandments, and they travel up toward the land of what they call in this section the land of Canaan, farther up north, what we now call the land of Israel. The interesting thing that you began to learn in chapter 6 of the story last week is as the people get right up here, remember, Moses sent spies into the land of Canaan to see what the land was like. And several spies went into the land, came back to the people and reported, wow, is this a cool place? And actually what they do is they bring back a vine with some really ripe grapes on it. And they tell people, this is indeed a land flowing with milk and honey, which for them meant was a very fertile land where food could grow, where they could survive. And most of the spies came back to the people saying, it's a great land, but the problem is the people who live there are giants. They're huge, and they're not going to let us move in. And Joshua and Caleb, who were also part of the spies, said to the people, yes, they're huge, but we don't have to worry. We don't have to be afraid, because God is with us, and God will provide for us. Who did the people choose to believe? The fearful spies. And so at that point, the people of Israel said to Moses, we can't go in yet. We'll never conquer the people. We'll never manage. The people are too big. God can't do that for us. And so God leads them on another 39 years of journey through the Sinai Peninsula in what we call the 40 years of the Exodus event, until they wander themselves up to what we now know is the Dead Sea. So they've come from down in here, they've wandered up into the Dead Sea, and now the people are on the eastern edge of what river? The Jordan River, which flows from what in the north? The Sea of Galilee, a freshwater lake that Jesus can walk on, that flows down into the Dead Sea and becomes so salty that it's almost impossible even to stand up in the sea. I had the opportunity to go and float in the Dead Sea, and it is so weird. You can hardly even stand without having to float. It's that salty. And so as the people travel around, they come up right here to the eastern edge of the Jordan River, where in this time period, Moses is told you don't get to go in, and he dies in the area of Mount Nebo. And Joshua now becomes the leader. And God says to Joshua, as I was with Moses, so I will be with you. Which is a really important thing for Joshua to hear. Because I don't know about you, but when I look back at the story of the Exodus, I realize that Moses spent 40 years with 1 million or more people who spent every day and every night complaining. They're not the kind of people I want to be around. Though I find myself being one of them sometimes. And poor Joshua is probably looking at God saying, are you kidding me? I have to leave these grumpy old people now? Remember, there were well over 1 million plus people in the Exodus event. And it had to be incredibly important to Joshua to hear those words from God. As I was with Moses, so I will be with you. And God goes on to say to Joshua, obey the law that Moses gave you. Remember the 10 Commandments and all the other laws that came. And then you will prosper. It was a big job before Joshua, and he chose to take it on. On the eastern edge of the Jordan River, Joshua sends spies across the water into the city of Jericho, which is just across the water. It's a large, walled encampment city. And Joshua knows that what needs to happen now, as the 1 million or more people of the Israelite nation move into this land of promise, they're going to need to battle for the land. Because in the time period that the people of Israel left this promised land area and went into Egypt and were in captivity under the Pharaoh and then traveled through the wilderness experience, other people moved into that land and took over and have established their lives and their homes and their cities. And so the Israelite people know that this is not going to be an easy thing. When 1 million or more people cross the river and say, oh, by the way, God said, your house is my house. Su casa es mi casa. Which is a whole different turn on that phrase for most of us these days, right? And the people who were living in the land of Israel said, well, sure, take my house. Right? Like any of you would do. Should we take a little sidestep into immigration issues? Oh no, I'd get political. We don't want to do that. So Joshua sends spies into the city of Jericho to sort of test things out. And the spies go to Rahab's house. And when there's only grown-ups in the room, I'll tell you Rahab's job. It's one of the oldest professions in the world. And someday, when there's only grown-ups in the room, we'll take another sidestep and I'll talk to you about how interesting it was that the spies went to her house. Kind of like our government officials in Costa Rica, right? Oh, but that'd be another political sermon. We don't want to go there. Somebody's got to ask the question, why did they go to Rahab's house? Right? Hello? Anyway, they go to Rahab's house. The king, the leader of Jericho, finds out that the Israelite spies are there. They've heard about the Israelites. They know how great their God is. Their God has been leading them for 40 years, led them out of Egypt, did some pretty incredible things to get them out of there, has been leading them through the wilderness. Now there's well over 1 million people right across the river who are ready to take this land back, and the king isn't exactly happy. So he sends his people out to try to find where these spies are. They knock on the door of Rahab's house, and Rahab says, no, they're not here. Why would those Israelites come to me? She's hiding them up on their roof. The king's men leave. She lowers the spies down out her window outside the walls of the city, and the spies go back to Joshua and help them understand what they're going to do. God says to Joshua, okay, here's what we're going to do. In order to prep for this great battle, I want all the men here and all the boys to be circumcised. This too will be another sermon when only grown-ups are in the room. Okay? At its basic, the circumcision of the men was to set them apart, as God had already done with the people of Israel. Set them apart. Designated them as gods. No other gods, but God. Sadly, they have to sit around for a couple of days. Because men who've just been circumcised are not willing to go to battle. Now, I tell you that part of the story because I just want to remind you how much I absolutely love the Bible. It is so funny sometimes. But when you get into Joshua and you actually read the story, it talks about how in pain all the men were, and they had to wait till all the men were out of pain before they could go into battle in Jericho. So here's what happened. Joshua sends the priests, the religious leaders, into the waters of the Jordan River. And as they enter into the Jordan River carrying the ark, the waters separate. Sound familiar? People move across the waters of the Jordan River and into the land of promise, and the waters return. And the first thing Joshua leads the people to do is to create a space of worship. Because when you're in the presence of a miracle and you realize you are really in the presence of the great Almighty God, the first thing you want to do is worship and thank that God. And so the people did just that. They created a place of worship, built some rocks, which are now actually technically in the middle of the Jordan River somewhere. So they lead them across, they create this worship space. And they get to the city of Jericho. And God says, what I want you to do is take all of your warriors, and I want you to march around the city of Jericho for 6 days. Just be quiet, just walk around the city. So they do. They walk around the city. And here's what I want you to do on the 7th day. On the 7th day, I want you at the point in time when I tell you to shout out loud and blow all the trumpets that you've got. And so, on the 7th day, as they're marching around the city, Joshua gives the command, and they all scream and yell, and they blow their trumpets, and the outer protective walls of the city fall. And the Israelites, who have surrounded Jericho, rush in, burn down the city, conquer it entirely, killing everybody who lived in Jericho. Man, woman, and child, and most of their animals, took their gold and silver and walked away proudly. And the only one who had lived in Jericho who survived was Rahab and her immediate family, to be rewarded for what she had done to save the spies. Oy vey. Welcome to chapter 7 of the story. Welcome to the land of promise. Welcome to Joshua's leadership. Battle after battle ensued as the people moved in and through the land of promise that God had said was theirs. Whenever they followed God's plan, whenever they turned to God and asked God, how do we do this? And God gave them the plan. Whenever they followed that plan, they were successful. And when they didn't, they were not successful. And under Joshua's leadership, there came times of battle and times of peace. And then times of battle. And the people, according to Frazee, learned some very important things. There are 3 things needed for success in this battling for the land of Israel. You have to be people of the Word. You have to know and do the commandments of God. Because when you do, you find success. And when you don't, you don't. You have to be people of prayer. You got to talk to God before you make a move. And trust that God will show you what move to make. And thirdly, you've got to be people of God. That's what circumcision was about. To be set apart for something special. To be different than others. Now, I don't know about you, but I struggle with what happened with the people of Israel as they entered into the land of promise. I struggle with their understanding of what God had called them to do. Because, like most people who are on the Christian side of the tradition, it's not the God we know. For you see, as they were to take the city of Jericho, God told the people, when the walls fall, take the city and kill every living being in it. And as they continued on in their battles from city to city, God said primarily the same thing. In fact, it even gets better. At one point when they were battling and some of the enemy was running away, God rained hail on the enemy to kill them so they couldn't get away. And I don't know about you, but I really struggle with that concept and that notion of God. And if you came today to find the perfect answer to make yourself comfortable, I'm here to tell you I haven't found it yet. I don't know it. In the thousands of years of history, not only in the writings of the Scriptures, but in the interpretations and the attempted understandings of what this is all about, I have yet to read anybody who's given me a plausible reason as why God would say, go in and kill a group of people who, like you, like the Israelites, were also made in the image and likeness of God, because in Genesis, that's what we declare. We have all been made in the image and likeness of God. I don't get it. And I've come to a point in my life and my faith where I have understood that I'm probably never going to get it. Because it is not the God I know. And it doesn't matter what the God I want to serve is about. It's not the God I know in Jesus Christ. So what's this all about? Well, I don't know. You know, in some ways, human beings think all sorts of things about God. Sometimes I think we give God a lot of credit and a lot of blame in ways that God never needed to take. I know this same sort of feeling happens from generation to generation. I know it happened in the founding of this country as Western Europeans moved from that eastern coast of the ocean to the western coast of the ocean to the eastern edge of what we now call the United States and declared that this is our land. And met people who already lived there and took them out, saying, this is our land, not yours. And human beings have been doing this in every generation. And I don't know if it was God saying to the Israelites, go to Jericho and kill them all. Or if it was their understanding that the way you win a war is to get rid of the enemy. Because you don't want to capture an enemy and have to imprison them, because they could escape. And what's the enemy going to do after they escape? You think they're going to forgive you? No. The best thing in battle, when you're trying to conquer not only a city but an entire land, is to take out its people. And they found justification in God to do that. And we continue to do so. And I learned something important. Would I know that I cannot find that answer? I go back to some answers that do make sense. And this phrase that God said to Joshua has become really important to me in my life, just as it was to Joshua. God says to Joshua, as I was with Moses, so I am with you. And whatever Moses faced, whatever Joshua faced, they faced it with a courage and strength that they could not muster on their own. And I think perhaps what they learned is that sometimes you have to battle the challenges in your life on your own. And sometimes, are you ready? Sometimes God even battles those challenges for you. Have you come to know that in your life yet? That there are some things in your life that you have gotten through that you know you could never have gotten through if God had not done something for you. And that, I think, is how the Israelites felt as they came into this land of promise. When God did battles that they could not on their own. But what they learned most of all is that as God had always been with them, God was with them. As God had always been with their ancestors, God was with them now. And that, my dear ones, who struggle with these questions of faith, is what you need to know most of all. As God was with Moses, as God was with Joshua, so God is with you. Sometimes enabling you to fight your battles on your own. And sometimes battling those challenges for you. I'm here to tell you as a Christian who knows God in Jesus Christ, who when the stone was rolled away, it did not fall on anybody who had placed it there, that God's greatest revenge is forgiveness. What to do with all these battles in the story of the Old Testament, I am not quite sure, except to lay them against what I know of God in Jesus Christ and say, no more will I say that God has called me to decimate any race or any peoples, but to love them equally and learn from the mistakes of the past and move forward with the knowledge and trust that as God has been with my ancestors, God is with me now. And that changes everything in my life. So today, I give thanks for the difficult stories and for the fact that I know in Jesus Christ that God is with us. Let's pray. Holy and gracious God, thank you